Maybe it's time you found a place you can actually afford. That's what my little sister told me the day she kicked me out of our family home. A week later, I sat on the cold floor, packing 30 years of my life into boxes in the dark. She thought she had stolen my future, but she forgot about the secrets our father left behind in old ink. She built her empire using my name, and I was about to use her handwriting to burn it all to the ground. I'd love to see where you're all watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy these stories, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Before the fire, there was the ice. The rage didn't start with a scream. It started with a sound, the crisp, clinical sound of an envelope sliding across the glass counter. My sister Clara wouldn't meet my eyes as she told me to find a place I could actually afford. I stared. I breathed. I said nothing. My hands were covered in a fine layer of flour, the same way they had been almost every day for the last 30 years. Now, the familiar powder felt like dust on my skin. Her perfect manicure tapped the glass twice, right over our father's name etched in the bakery's logo. That name meant nothing to her anymore. My home, my bakery, my eviction. I watched her turn and walk away, her posture confident, victorious. She saw my silence as weakness. I slowly unclenched my fists. The flour drifted down, settling on the floor like fine white ash. That white dust on the floor. It reminded me of another time, a happier time. I remember her at 10 years old, standing on a stool just to reach the countertop, her small hands lost in a mountain of dough. Flour was smudged on her nose. Her laughter echoed in the warm kitchen, a sound I thought I would protect forever. I taught her everything I knew, guiding her hands, showing her the patience and love that our father had taught me. It was our legacy, our shared heart. But laughter couldn't pay for ambition. Growing up is expensive, and so another memory surfaces, this one colder, sharper. It's not our warm kitchen, but a sterile pawn shop downtown, smelling of dust and desperation. The light outside was gray, muted. I watched the man behind the counter turn the necklace over in his hands. It was our mother's last piece of jewelry, a simple silver chain with a single pale turquoise stone. He weighed it. He named a price. I said yes. I walked out with a handful of cash that felt cold and heavy, nothing like the warmth of the silver it replaced. That money paid for the first 2 semesters of her business degree, an education I told her was a full scholarship she had earned all on her own. It was a small lie to protect a much larger sacrifice. I sold my past for her future. I almost forgot about that necklace until last Christmas. She was wearing a new designer watch, talking about expanding the bakery, about her vision. Then she turned to me, a casual, dismissive wave of her hand. "You know," she said, "I ever tell you how much I loved Mom's old turquoise necklace? Whatever happened to that?" My heart stopped for a beat. I looked at the watch on her wrist, a purchase likely costing 10 times what I got for that piece of our mother. I kept my voice even. I told her it was lost, years ago. She just shrugged, already moving on to the next topic, the next brilliant idea she had. She never noticed the silence that followed. She never noticed how my hands tightened into fists under the table. She had asked me about that necklace, and I had lied. The memory faded, leaving a bitter cold that had nothing to do with the empty room around me. For days, I'd been a ghost in my own home, taping boxes while the tape gun screeched in the silence. Kitchen, books, linens. I sealed, labeled, and pushed each box aside, small tombstones for a life that was no longer mine. Then the lights flickered and died. The refrigerator's hum cut off, and darkness swallowed the room. My phone's flashlight skittered across the floor and found a notice taped to the front door. Bright red letters. Past due. Disconnection of service. The account name stared back at me. Clara. I had put it there as an act of trust. She had turned it into a statement. Darkness became my only roommate. My light swept over the ghosts of where the furniture used to be, the empty space vast and hostile. There was nothing left, nothing at all, except for one thing. In the far corner, solid and silent, sat the one piece I hadn't packed yet, our father's old wooden desk. My phone's light cut a nervous beam across the floorboards as I approached the desk. It was the one thing our father had built with his own hands. I ran my fingers over the familiar scratches on the dark wood, a map of my entire childhood. I wasn't looking for anything, just saying goodbye to the last piece of him, the last piece of us. My hand slid into the deep bottom drawer to clear out old photographs. That's when I felt it. A slight give, a soft click. Behind a false panel was a thin manila folder, held shut by a brittle rubber band. It wasn't a will. It wasn't old letters. It was a loan agreement from a bank I had never heard of, for an amount that made the air leave my lungs. I scrolled past the dense paragraphs of legal text, my eyes searching for the final page, and then I saw it. My name, Amelia Faulkner, signed neatly on the dotted line, her handwriting on my name. The shaking in my hands began to subside, replaced by an icy calm. Tucked behind the loan document was something else, a stack of bank statements detailing where every single dollar had gone. There were no entries for flour or bakery supplies. Instead, I saw names I recognized from the glossy magazines Clara always left around. Gucci, the Four Seasons, a down payment for a white convertible. The shaking stopped. My breathing steadied. I saw everything. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a performance. A 3-year-long act where I was the silent, trusting investor in my own destruction. Every warm smile she gave me, every casual complaint about business expenses, it was all part of the script. A script paid for with a future she had stolen from me. My phone lay on the desk, its screen dark. My first instinct was to call her, to scream. I didn't touch it. The first phone call I made wasn't to my sister. It was to a name I found online, a forensic accountant whose website promised discretion and results. I met him the next day in a sterile, anonymous office that smelled of coffee and clean paper. I didn't tell him the story of the little girl with flour on her nose, or the memory of my mother's necklace. I didn't have to. I simply slid the manila folder across the polished mahogany table. I watched his eyes scan the loan agreement, then the forged signature, then the bank statements that followed. He saw the numbers. He read the dates. He understood the crime. I learned later that the first step in a war like this is not to declare it. It's to cut off the enemy's supply lines. 2 weeks later, my sister attended the annual Children's Hospital Charity Auction, the biggest social event of the season. I saw the pictures online. She was wearing a new blood-red dress, holding a glass of champagne, smiling like a queen in her stolen castle. She raised her paddle for a vintage Rolex, a casual bid of $20,000, a performance for the city's elite. When the time came to pay, she presented her sleek, black American Express with a flourish. The attendant swiped it, once, then again. The confident smile on Clara's face began to tighten. She fumbled in her purse for another card, then a third. The polite apologies from the staff grew colder. The whispers in the room grew louder. Her credit declined. My plan accepted. The first crack in her perfect facade wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't confusion. It was pure, unfiltered rage. She stormed out of the ballroom, leaving a trail of shocked silence behind her. I knew she wouldn't call the bank. She wouldn't blame the system. She would look for a person to blame. She was starting to lose control, and she would be coming for me. She didn't scream at me over the phone. She cried. It was a calculated, manipulative performance, asking for a family meeting at the old apartment to talk things through. She said our aunts were worried about me. She was setting a stage and casting me as the villain. I agreed to come. I brought the folder with me. The apartment was hollow, echoing with every footstep. My aunts sat on rented chairs, their faces etched with concern directed entirely at Clara, who looked pale and fragile. She began her speech, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity, telling them how I had become irrational, how I had frozen her accounts out of spite, how I was destroying our family legacy. She was brilliant, she was convincing, she was a liar. I waited until her tears reached their dramatic peak, until the silence in the room was thick with sympathy for her. I stood up. I stepped forward. I placed the manila folder on the coffee table. The soft thud of the paper silenced her mid-sob. "What is this?" she spat, her victim act vanishing. "More of your cruel games, Amelia?" I didn't answer her question. I just stated a fact. It's a loan agreement from Westbourne Bank for $2 million. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You're delusional. You're losing your mind." I looked straight into her eyes, my voice low and steady. My name, her handwriting, game over. Just as she opened her mouth to scream to call me a crazy old woman, the apartment door creaked open. Mark, her ex-fiancé, stood in the doorway. He looked tired, sad, and done with the lies. All eyes turned to him. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. "I was there when she practiced your signature," he said, his voice clear and calm. "Hundreds of times. She used to call it perfecting her art." A collective gasp went through the room. The air crackled. The stage Clara had so carefully set had just become her cage. Her mask didn't just crack, it shattered. She looked at me then, across the empty room filled with our family's judgment, and for the very first time, her eyes weren't filled with anger or pity or greed. They were filled with fear. I remember the fear in my sister's eyes. It was the last time I ever saw her. The legal battle that followed was messy, but the truth was simple and sharp. She lost the bakery, the car, the penthouse apartment, and the life that was built on a lie. I didn't attend the final hearing. I didn't need to. Her story was over. Mine was just beginning. That was 6 months ago. Today, the kitchen is different. It's not the quiet, solitary space I once knew. It's loud, chaotic, and filled with sunlight. The air doesn't smell of profit and loss, but of yeast, melting butter, and the bright, sharp sound of teenage laughter. I'm teaching a free baking class for at-risk youth at the local community center. There's a young girl, Maria, who reminds me a little of Clara at 10 years old. The same eager eyes, the same way she gets flour on her nose. But there is a gratitude in her that Clara never had. A hunger not just for bread, but for connection. Today she perfected her first sourdough loaf. I watched her pull it from the oven, her face glowing with pride. I smiled. I nodded. I understood. I took the warm loaf from her, the heat seeping into my palms. These were the same hands that once let flour fall like ash, that once trembled while holding proof of a crime. Now they were steady. They were creating again. I handed the bread back to Maria and watched her eyes light up as she hugged it to her chest. For years, I thought the bakery was my legacy. The bricks, the mortar, the name our father built. I was wrong. The bakery was never the legacy. The baking was. I built a home from what I gave away. Thank you so much for being here. I'd be honored to read your own family stories in the comments and hope you'll subscribe to hear more.